And if he were to do things that violate his character, he could no longer be God. Right, so the Bible says God cannot do several things. You guys know that? What are some things that God can't do? Sin, exactly, right? And sin is something that's defined as something that contradicts his character. What else can't God do? Anything else? He cannot lie. That's right, very good over there. Right? Because lie is something that's not true, and God is always telling the truth. Right? So if God were to forgive sin without any kind of punishment for sin, then God himself would not be just. He would not be good himself. And he would be having to change his own character and actually not be God at all. If God is truly a good God, then bad things, evil itself, has to be punished. You know, there's a man, if you know, well, several people throughout history, but we're talking about Russia, obviously, this time, invading the Ukraine. And there was a president of Russia called Lenin. You guys know about him? Lenin was actually probably killed more people than Hitler did. And he died being celebrated by his nation, by his country's honored, his statues, and even had a city named after him in Russia. So he never had to get any punishment for anything he did. Do you think that's fair? That someone can do that evil and get away with it? Well, God doesn't think that's fair either. And that's why when he died, he also has to face justice. Right? And so just God has to punish Lenin's sin because what he did was evil. And in the same way, if God doesn't punish our evil, then he's no longer good or just.
Yeah, that leads me into another question that I feel like often comes up when talking with Christians. So if your God's real, then why do bad things happen?
Yeah, that's actually one of the toughest questions people face. How many of you had a situation where something horrible happened to your family or friends, and it's easy, right? And you feel it. Why would God let this thing happen to me? Right? There's actually a whole field of study in theology called theodicy that deals with this issue. It's very, very tough because it's not just an intellectual argument; it's also a heart argument. It's also an emotional one. And frankly, I can't answer many of those questions. I simply can't. We don't know why God lets terrible things happen at this time. But that doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Because maybe terrible things happen on earth right now because that's the only way we can become better. There was a situation where a pastor, actually his family, went on vacation, but the pastor had to stay home. And his wife and I think had 4 kids at the time, took a cruise ship for their family vacation. So they had to go ahead of time because he had to finish whatever he was working on. And the ship that the family took actually sank in the middle of the Atlantic and killed all the kids. His wife was the only survivor. And so she wrote back to him, telling him to come, and he came on a similar boat to cross the ocean to see where his wife was. Just heartbroken about what happened. And as his boat was crossing the place in the ocean where his family, his kids had died, that their boat had sunk, he began to write a poem that became a song. And the song was called "It Is Well With My Soul." And that song has comforted, has brought peace to all kinds of people all over the world. And not only that, he and his wife they actually went to Jerusalem and ended up starting a home to help other kids who were orphans. And they would never have been able to do that if their own kids were still alive. But does that mean that God was justified in taking these kids' lives? I don't know why he would do that. All I know is even though there was a great tragedy and great evil, God used it for something so much better than we can ever know. And that's what I think we need to recognize. If God exists, the evil that we face right now, and the time that we live right now, God sees the past, present, and the future of what happens because of the struggles we have to face now.
Yeah, that would lead me into another question. So assuming that God is real, like you say, and we don't know why good things happen, bad things happen. Would that make God evil or good, judging by my understanding of the scriptures? In the Old Testament, it seems like God just went around killing everyone. So is God the deliverer of destruction and evil, or is he a good God?
Again, that's a great question, and you'll face that if you go to college or university. A lot of even professors will say, how can you believe in God? He committed genocide in the Old Testament. I haven't even heard of that argument before. And what do you say to that? And I just say, well, how do we respond? It's a tough one, isn't it? Because it looks like God is very mean in the Old Testament. And we can't always understand this. But here, let me ask a question for you guys, and you as well. If you could travel back in time and meet baby Hitler, would you take his life?
No.
Why not?
It's a baby.
It's a baby, he hasn't done anything, but you know it's baby Hitler. You know that even though he hasn't done anything, you've traveled back in time, you know what the future is going to be like. Would you take his life? It's a tough question, isn't it? And any of you who watch sci-fi TV shows or movies, you know what I mean, right? If you travel back in time and you fix something in the past, what ends up happening? You mess up the future, even actually making it worse, right? And so if you were to go back, travel back in time and kill baby Hitler, you might have prevented Hitler from doing all those awful things, but maybe someone who was a better general would have taken over the Nazis and won World War II. It would have been all your fault for killing baby Hitler. See the problem? We cannot judge or look at a past event like what happened in the Old Testament with our own understanding because we think we know better. Because we don't know all of the ramifications or all the results of what's going to happen in the decisions we make. So for example, if God knew there was a tribe of 100 people or even 200 people in the Middle East, and if he allowed that tribe to survive, they would wipe out everybody else in the world. Do you think God has a right to stop them before they do something evil? Absolutely, he does. Because he knows that tribe perfectly. He knows everything that can happen, past, present, and future. And that means only he can decide who lives and dies. You have to remember, God doesn't just make judgments about what he sees. God also knows all the potential possibilities of everything we don't see. And because he has that knowledge, he has a right to judge. Now think about it this way again. If we knew that something terrible was going to happen, and we choose not to do something to stop it, would we also feel guilty for not stopping it? Right? Wouldn't we be mad at someone who knew something was evil and didn't stop it? Absolutely. Well, isn't that what God is doing in the Old Testament? He's stopping evil before it starts. And I think that gives him the knowledge and the justification to put an end to it.
I think atheists, much like Christians, sometimes can't agree on things. There's lots of levels of atheism. There's atheists that even claim that other atheists aren't atheists, much like Christians who will claim other Christians aren't Christians. What do you, how do you view atheists? What's the right way to put this? What are the similarities or differences between an atheist and a Christian?
Well, I mean, it really is hard because it depends, right? There are countries where atheism is actually the law, where they encourage it. Like in North Korea, where you can't worship anyone else. The problem is everyone is designed to worship someone greater than themselves. So they actually, instead of celebrating Christmas, for example, they celebrate the Korean dictator, you know him? His mom has the birthday on December 26th, so that's what they celebrate instead. And they created a whole cult around Kim Jong-un, the president of North Korea. So because they have to worship someone. And at the end of the day, this is the point about having a belief about our world and who we are. is that we don't live just in our universe. This universe points to something greater than ourselves. C.S. Lewis says this way, the guy who wrote Narnia. He says, if we have desires or longings that can only be satisfied by something outside of our universe, that means there has to be something outside of our physical universe that exists. So just like we have, when you're thirsty, what is your body telling you? You want water, right? Or pop or something else, but water hopefully. Right? When you're hungry, what is your body telling you? You need food. When you're up till 2 in the morning finishing your last essay, right? Or studying for your exam, what is your body telling you? Sleep. You need sleep. Now, if your body is telling you you need to be able to find something that explains things, or that you have value, right? Or that you need community, what does that tell you? That you were designed to need those things too. Or you need to be able to find purpose in life. And I can tell you, everybody, atheists and Christians, all need to find purpose. The problem is with the atheists is their purpose can only be found in themselves. And that's a very small perspective of reality because you don't know much. As a Christian, I believe my purpose is made by the designer of our universe, and he knows everything. So who do you trust more to design your purpose?
Yeah, as an atheist, I believe my purpose is to live on this earth and to be, whatever people need around me. So peace, joy, and so to serve people. So how does that differ from you?
Oh, and I meet great atheists who do wonderful things. Like, you were at the sermon this morning, the lady I debated, her name is Christine. She's such a nice lady. I'm friends with her now. And she actually goes to the United Nations to lobby that Muslim countries shouldn't be persecuting atheists or gay people, shouldn't be throwing them off buildings, right? You see that in the news. And what I said during the debate is, you know what, Christine, you do such a great job fighting for human rights at the United Nations. That's wonderful that you do that. But then here's the question I asked her. Where do human rights come from? If we get to decide what's right and wrong for us, that means those Muslim countries who are throwing gay people off buildings, aren't they just deciding what's right and wrong for them? Isn't that just their truth? So who are we to tell them that they have to believe like we do? The only way we can do that is if there's a standard of right and wrong that is more important and higher than the standard of right and wrong that countries, that groups of people use. Rules that exist beyond just ourselves. And if there are rules that exist beyond ourselves, that means these rules are not made by countries or by humans. They have to be made by someone else.
What is your response to, I think the Big Bang, there's this, we are just a ball of cells that mash together, and we formed people. I've seen these cells that can transform into other cells, and we have these charts of this animal turning to this animal, or monkey to man. What's your response to those kind of things?
Oh, well, again, there's lots that we can get into. But think about it this way, guys, in terms of deciding our value. We believe that human beings are valuable, right? We believe that human beings should be treated equally, right? And it doesn't matter your skin color, your gender, your sexual orientation. You should be treated with all kinds of value and respect. Does everybody agree? So here's the question, where do we get that rule from? How do we know that we ought to do that if we're just here by accident? If all of us, everything we have, our civilization, is here just because of an accident of nature. How do these rules get established? See, that's part of the issue here. And then we can talk about the science and all kinds of stuff. But even when you think about, say, Big Bang, the Big Bang just simply means the universe had a beginning. And I don't think any major scientist or astronomer actually believes the universe had no beginning. But the problem is that the universe had a beginning, just like anything with a beginning, someone had to cause that beginning. Does that make sense? And the reason why I say it's a someone is because what began at the Big Bang is so complicated, is so thought through, it doesn't look like it could have come by accident. So if there was a designer who made everything, then it's obvious that's where we get our rules from about how we behave, because we're designed just like the universe is. Without a designer of the universe, then where do the rules that we believe exist about equality and human rights come from? They can't come from nothing.
This is maybe my last question, and you've probably already touched on it a little bit, but if me being an atheist and you being a Christian, and we both work the same job, we both are good to our employees, at the end of the day, and we both actually maybe struggle with the same thing, some hatred towards something.
Right.
At the end of the day, who's to say that you're good and I'm not?
That's a great question. I really appreciate it. I think it's important for us to understand, as Christians, we don't think we're better than anyone else. In fact, the Bible reminds us that we're not. Right? But again, I think it was C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, and if you've never read that book, guys, pick it up. It's good. It's very easy to read. It's like 2 pages a chapter, which is my favorite kind, right? He says, look, if you're a Christian and if you're a non-Christian, potentially you could be starting at the same place in life. In fact, sometimes the non-Christian is actually better than the Christian. But the person who's not a Christian goes through life, and in terms of improving herself, she has nowhere to go. She has her only life number is her standard for how she should behave, how she feels. So her life is like this. And you'll always stay that way because there's no way for you to find a higher example for improvement. Right? If you're the non-Christian, say you're down here, right? If you're truly a Christian, the Bible says that you're always becoming more and more like Jesus every day. And so you may start down here, but you keep going this way. Sometimes you go back down, you go back up, sometimes you go back down again. But at the end of the day, where you end, according to the Christian story, is now you are living and acting exactly how Jesus made you to be. So you end up here. The atheist is always going to stay the same. So the difference is not where we start. The difference is where we end.
Yeah, let's give Jojo a round of
And
applause. I just want to vocalize before I get up and walk away. A lot of you youth probably know me, and I just don't want to give you a crisis of faith. I am not an atheist. I preached to some of you guys a month ago. My ideas have not changed since then. I'm a pastor in Sylvan Lake. We run house churches, and I've seen you at youth and Lions and all other places. So I just came here to play the part of an atheist.
You did a good job.
I think we're moving to the next point where you can ask questions, or are you just going to share?
That's a bit of a presentation.
Okay,
so
perfect.
We'll get going. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You're awesome. Thank you. God bless you. You know, the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you go to campus, university, when you join the workforce, the person that you'll be talking to is not going to play atheist. They actually will be an atheist. Or a Muslim, or a Jew, a Hindu, or even worse, and they're the hardest people to talk to, a backslidden Christian who thinks they know better than you. And what's so critical, and I'm so glad Jennifer organized this, is that as Christians, we need to prepare for that. There's 3 top reasons that I've seen why young people leave the faith. Okay, you guys want to guess what those are? According to the studies and surveys I've seen. Peer pressure, that's part of it, because there's a huge change, and especially in people entering university, they drop out of the faith. But guys, most of those young people apparently who leave the faith at university already mentally checked out when they were 13. That's your age. But there's 3 reasons. Does anyone have a guess? Yes, go ahead. Yes, that's one of the number one reasons. They were never given a chance to actually explore all the intellectual questions they had. And by the way, guys, please ask questions. Right? Don't be afraid. God is big enough to answer any and uphold any of your questions. It's fine. A Christian apologist I heard on the radio or a podcast said when he was about your age, he thought he saw a contradiction in the Bible. He had a huge crisis of faith. So he went to his grandpa who was a pastor, but thinking that he had found this great contradiction, his grandpa was like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Here's the answer to it. But thankfully he had an answer. And that's the point. Parents, for you, feel free. Let your child explore. These are good questions. And frankly, guys, I prefer if you ask these questions now, so that we can give you the best answers that we have. And if you find better answers, this is what I tell my youth group. If you find better answers than I'm giving you, then feel free to walk away from this faith. But those answers be better than what I'm giving you. Don't just have questions so that to justify you walking away. Actually seek truth. Right? Find out what's actually true. What are the other two you think? Yeah. Rules. That's part of the reason, because if we know what the rules are, most of us will follow those rules, right? When I was in Egypt, I was driving with a tour guide, and our tour guide said, we rode this bus and just beautiful scenery, we saw the pyramids. He said, these white lines on the road? He said, those are just for tourists, to make you guys feel safe. We don't actually follow them. Okay? So, but if we know what the rules are, we usually don't have problems with them and why they're there. I'd
say misunderstanding the theological interpretations or beliefs.
Well, you know what? That's probably a good one to tie into. So one of those three reasons is the view of sexuality and gender the Bible has. Because a lot of people say, this teaching has to be changed, or, and guys, this is just the reality. People want to be able to sleep with whoever they want to. And they'd rather throw out what they believe so they can do what they want. And so that's one of the top two reasons. What's our third one? Do you want to have a guess? What do you think? Yeah?
That they don't know why they believe what they believe.
Yeah, that's definitely one. We're going to come to that one. That's the first one. We don't have any answers. That ties into that one. Yeah, very good. Anyone else? It's actually one of the issues we talked about with Dalton. Yeah, over here.
The problem of evil.
Yes. My grandma died. Or my cousin was in a car accident, was paralyzed for life. How can a good God let that happen? What did you think about my response to the problem of evil? Do you have anything to add? Thank you. Because those top three reasons are the reasons why you may have to struggle with the Christian faith too. And like I said, it's better to do this now, to examine this now. Because here's a simple rule that I follow, okay? Oftentimes, we want to justify what we believe through intellectual arguments. But many times people leave the faith because of what they feel inside. And it's critical for us to understand. Feelings are important. We don't want to deny them. But your heart cannot believe for long what your head rejects. Have you got that? Your heart cannot believe for long what your head rejects. In other words, it's important to know foundationally what is true if you want to believe in your heart what you want to believe. And just think of married people. Those are your parents back there. Right, ladies, how would you feel if your husband forgets your birthday?
Ouch. Ow.
Right? Would that be something that's okay? Would that help or hinder your relationship? Okay? Of course, your husband should know your birthday because he cares for you, right? He has to take care of you. He has to help you celebrate that day with you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how God is too, you know that? If we truly claim to have a relationship with Him, shouldn't we care about the things He cares about? Right? It's not just head knowledge for the sake of head knowledge. It's for the sake of understanding who our God is. You know, it's great. I didn't know about the Price is Right thing. It's funny because when I was watching that clip, I was remembering what had happened afterwards. So because I won, I'm not allowed to go back on the Price is Right for the next 10 years. You know that?
For the next 10 years.
10 years. And by the way, taxes is 40%. So I had to pay that. If I had more like a car or something, I wouldn't even be able to take the car until I paid the 40% tax first. So thank God, I really thank the Lord that it was cash that I won, because I could just give that away, right? But here's the thing that I always want to be able to say. Remember when I was choosing the box at the end? You notice I didn't even ask the audience which number I should choose, because God was already telling me to choose number 9. It was so clear in my head. One of those moments, God exists. It's like He's telling us speaking to you right there. Right, and I didn't know. I had to do it, and I chose it. It was the right one. I'm like, thank you, Lord. That was awesome. And then when you on The Price is Right, by the way, you see all of the things you see on TV. There's about 300 people in the studio, and I can tell you more stories, by the way. Oh, and if you ever want to go, talk to me. We have people coming afterwards asking me, we're coming back tomorrow. How did you get chosen on your first try, kind of thing? And then one of the ushers actually said he knew one guy who tried 19 times. He waited 3 hours each time in line to go on the show before he was finally chosen. But one of the things that's critical about the show, you can watch it, it's all about value. Did you notice that? You have to get the price right. And it's critical to know that, otherwise you won't win. But if you think about it, that's also about our lives. Our worldview helps us understand what our value actually is. And let me just contrast these 4 ways we can value ourselves, and then we can take some questions. I think it's important for you to be able to, again, express what you believe. If you are an atheist, if you're what we call a materialist, and we call you a materialist, this is not an insult, this is just what the belief is. That means all you believe is that matter exists, but nothing immaterial. No souls, no spirits, no God, no angels. Okay? And if you believe matter is the only thing that exists, then where do you get your value from? How do you determine that you as a human being have value? Well, the only way you can do that is by your preference. You prefer or you value things. So when you talk about equality rights, or the rights for people to be not oppressed, not to be invaded by Russia, for example, all you're saying really is, this is what I prefer, this is what I think is right. But all you're doing is speaking from your own matter. When I debated Christine, one of the points I made is material things cannot give us free will. Right? Because free will is one of those things that actually is immaterial. So just think about it with me, okay? Imagine if you were at home and what's a good example here? Oh, your parents come in and they notice that there was a dent on the car. And you were the last person driving.
Oh, I can't drive.
You can't drive that. It's soon enough, right? Right? Do they have a right to say, we noticed this dent in the car, what happened? Now imagine if you responded and you said, well, my atoms, they drove to this place and they got hit over there, but it's not my fault, it's just my atoms that did it, my matter that did it. Would that justify you doing it? Well, no, they would say, why in the world did you get into that situation when you got into an accident? Because they would hold you accountable for the choices you made, right? Well, that choice you made cannot exist if you're just material. You're immaterial. Here's another piece of evidence that I like to use. Just think about it this way. Imagine a giant green triangle. Can you do that right now? Can you imagine a giant green triangle? Who has an isosceles triangle? a right angle triangle? Do you guys don't want to talk about it? Yeah. Just checking. Right? Yeah. Now, if I were to cut open your brains right now, would I be able to look inside your brain and find that green triangle?
No.
Why not?
Because it's not in there.
Because it's not what?
Not in
It's not material. What is it? It's immaterial, right? Right? Our minds are actually an example of something that exists that isn't matter. It's immaterial. And if that's the case, our free will, our minds, actually are evidence that the universe that we live in is not just physical. It's also metaphysical. There's something more to it. And that means we can find our value, not just in our physical things. Secondly, some people believe that their value can be found in things in what they do. Right? And a lot of people live that way. They go to work, they enjoy going to school, they get the highest degrees. And many religions teach this as well. You have to do certain things in order to get value, to be able to know that you're a valuable human being. Do you know why they don't eat cows in India? Why is beef illegal? Go ahead, let's hear loud again. Yeah, that's part of it, definitely. There's nothing more fundamental though. Anyone else? Why don't they eat beef? If you go to McDonald's in India, you can look at the menu, it's all beef free. Yeah?
They're sacred, they like worship the cow.
Why?
I know.
Supposedly if you die, you get reincarnated as a cow.
Yes! Right, if you eat a cow, you could be eating grandma. You know this? And when you're eating this cow, how you're reincarnated is determined by how you behaved when you lived as a human being. So if you were a good person, you can get reincarnated to another person who's maybe wealthier. If you were a bad person, maybe you become a cow. That's the phrase, holy cow, right? Literally comes from that. And it's all about how you earn your way into a higher plane. The problem is, without God, there's no definition of what the higher plane is. Right? Without God, there's no standard that you use. And by the way, there's no evidence that human beings become cows. I don't think that's the case. When we think about that worldview actually says that evil itself is an illusion. It doesn't exist because we're all just dreams of God. This is what I mean. There was a Christian apologist in India speaking, and he was sharing the gospel to this crowd in a tent. And a man comes in who's a Hindu, and he says, don't you know, evil doesn't really exist. We're all just dreaming this. Right? There's no such thing because we're all just products of this God who's done all this work. And so when he's explaining that evil is just an illusion, this Christian apologist actually goes to the table and takes a pot of boiling water and then puts it on top of the, or just on top of the guy's head, not on it, but just over his head, and says, if I were to pour this boiling hot water on you, would that be evil? And the man looked at the pot, looked at the Christian, and they walked out of the tent. Why? Because he knew that evil isn't just an illusion. That we're not just reincarnated beings. There's something more about us than that. The third way we can find value, ladies and gentlemen, especially in our culture right now, is by how we feel about ourselves. Or how we're attracted to someone else. Our whole identity is now based on how we are, who we love. And that line is so powerful because it sounds so loving. Right? But here's the problem. When you create an identity based on how you feel, doesn't that mean your identity changes every time your feelings change? And how often do our feelings change? Now you know what I mean, right? It's not just me. I have a friend who worked at the Boys and Girls Club in Calgary, one of them. And he said a young woman would come in as part of this group. He had 13 young people he worked with. Half of them claimed to be transgender. And one young lady came and she had a bracelet that she wore. And she flipped the top of it to indicate what gender she was at the moment. And in the span of 4 hours, she changed her gender identity 5 times based on how she feels. Now just think about it from a perspective of someone who cares for this young woman. Do you think that's healthy? That she would do that? That's so harmful, right? And she is thinking, it doesn't matter what my biology says, I'm going to just focus on how I feel. That doesn't make any sense. Because here's something that, especially as adults, you get to learn. Your feelings lie all the time. You know that? Your feelings lie all the time. You can't always trust them. And the challenge that we have in our culture is that our feelings are now so elevated we can't disagree with people's feelings. Imagine the same scenario, right? This time you're at home and you see your brother has knocked over a plant in the house. It's spilled all over the floor. And as soon as it's spilled over the floor, your mom walks in, she sees you, she sees the plant that's spilled over, and then she yells at you, "How dare you knock over my favorite plant?" What's your first reaction?
It wasn't me.
What is it?
It was the dog.
It was
But it's usually two in our house.
Yeah, which probably might be true, right? But you would assign blame to the person who's responsible, wouldn't you? It wasn't me, Mom, it was my brother, right? And if that's the case, should her feelings of anger towards you change?
No. Yeah.
No? I want to talk to your mom like that. Okay. Of course, right? Right? She should no longer be mad at you because you weren't responsible. Who was responsible? Your brother. She should be mad at him. And that's the point. Facts should change how you feel. Feelings should not change the facts. Does that make sense? And if you are guided by that truth, you live in reality, not just how people feel. And that's really critical nowadays. Because that's the last point, and we're going to take some questions. If we can't determine our value just based on our matter, we're just material beings, our value doesn't come because of how hard we work, our value doesn't come because of how we feel. The Christian story says our value starts with how God feels about us. And the Christian story says if you want to find your value, just look at the cross. Because there's no religion, no worldview that says God is so much in love with us that he would show us the extent of how he values us by sending his one and only Son to die for us. When my nephew Nathan, who's about your age now actually, was first born, he was the first grandson on both sides of the family. For those of you who are parents, you know exactly what that means. He was a spoiled little brat. Okay? And I know that because I spoiled him a lot too. I can give all kinds of gifts if you come and visit. And I remember, I don't know why it came out, but obviously I think there was a teaching moment there by God. But when I came to visit one time, and my nephew was running around, and I went to my brother, and I said, "Leo, can I ask you a question?" I asked him, "Do you think you'd ever be willing to give up your only son to save someone else's life?" And I let that question sort of hang in the air. It was an odd question, I know. But then I said, well, what if this person who needed saving was an enemy, someone who stabbed you in the back, someone who broke your heart? Would you give up your child's life to save that person? And my brother never answered that question. But you see the point? The good news is God already did. That's the Christian story. And in that answer, he actually gave us the value that we ought to have. And I'll close out with this and we'll take some questions. The Apostle John, who wrote the Gospel of John, if you recall, he often used a title to describe himself. Does anyone know what that title was? Yes? Go ahead. What was his favorite title to describe himself? The disciple that Jesus loved. Very good. And so we live in a time when we are told we have to define ourselves in all kinds of ways, especially how we're defined by who we love. The Gospel of John reminds us that we're defined by who loves us. And the Christian story is worth believing, ladies and gentlemen, because if you look at all the other options out there, none of them give us the value that God has when we look on the cross for us. And I want to give you that challenge. Christianity is worth believing because it's true and because it's good. And wherever you go, there is no other worldview that we can test on both of those points, unlike Christianity. All right, so let's take some questions or comments or thoughts. Anything? Yes, go ahead.
You stated earlier how many people may express their feelings change.
Yes.